Hi, guys. I did find the interview with the victim's daughter, the one who was a victim of Herb Baumeister. Now, she didn't even realize she didn't know who her father was until he turned out to be a victim of Herb Baumeister. But I found that the small interview, it's very short, and it was on WTHR News. So let's watch.
6 to a 13 News exclusive. Tonight we're hearing from the family of a new victim recently identified from human remains at the Fox Hollow Farm.
So this is the former Westfield property of suspected serial killer Herb Baumeister. Our Jenny Runovich talked with the coroner today and with the victim's daughter. Jenny.
Yeah, that victim's daughter just got confirmation of this yesterday. As you can imagine, she is in shock. This brings the total number of people identified as victims at Fox Hollow Farm to 10. Another victim at Fox Hollow Farm now has a name. Daniel Thomas Halloran, born in 1972. His remains broken and buried for 3 decades in Westfield, now identified.
I was born in 92. He went missing in 93. I looked out for him. I searched for him all my life.
Halloran's daughter never knew her dad. Her mom told her he left Florida for his home state of Indiana when she was a toddler, and they never heard from him again. She got the phone call Monday from the Hamilton County coroner. Her father was the likely victim of a serial killer.
It was an emotional conversation that we had with her.
And it just makes me kind of sick and weary to my stomach. Like I just had
That's
to know that my
sad.
dad was brutally murdered. It's hard. And for all the other victims out there and their families, I'm with them. I'm praying hard for them.
Halloran is the 10th victim with a positive ID at Fox Hollow Farm, and a surprise for the case.
He was an individual that was not on our radar.
Wow.
Wasn't someone that was reported missing.
See, that right there makes me so sad. This little girl, well, she's not little anymore, but she said she was searching for her father all her life, and no one even reported the man missing. That's heartbreaking.
Didn't know anything about him.
Halloran's remains were found in a different part of the farm than the other murdered men, the investigation
Really?
now branching out. It took forensic genealogy at Othram Laboratories to identify him, and the coroner says the confirmation process was challenging. Halloran's mother, brother, and father are all dead. They need a relative to compare DNA. Then they discovered his mom had died of an overdose in Marion County. That led to a match.
So we contacted the Marion County Coroner's Office, and they were able to provide us with a bloodstain card, a DNA card from the mother. And we were able then to do the comparison of the DNA from the remain to the mother's DNA and lock in that identification.
Jellison only learned recently that Halloran had a daughter. She's now taking a DNA test for triple confirmation.
It was a blessing in some sort to know, because I was always wondering.
Time will tell, but I think it kind of just brought her a little closer to the dad that she never knew.
A family member with answers, however difficult they may be. So while speaking with Coral today, she told me that her aunt had heard there was a serial killer here in Indiana around the time that Halloran disappeared. She suspected they were connected, but never knew for sure. Coral now plans to bury her dad near his brother and mom here in Indy. Also want to let you know we learned today 3 more DNA profiles from the remains found at Fox Hollow Farm are now undergoing testing, so we could have 3 more names soon.
We know you'll continue to cover it.
We will.
Thanks, Jenny.
All right, the continuation of the book. We need to get the energy levels up in here, Jason said, apparently deep in thought. The entire team had congregated around the swimming pool. After much discussion, we finally hit upon the idea of playing some 80s and 90s dance music, the sort of tunes that would have been popular in the bars and clubs back then. This is, remember, the paranormal investigation team. Yeah. Cranking up the volume on my phone, I ran it through an external speaker and began to stream some classic dance music. All of it was a distinctly gay-centric theme. The idea behind that was simple. Not only her, but also all the young men who returned to Fox Hollow Farm with him were all very active in the gay nightclub scene. If anything, we're going to attract them. Why wouldn't it be the songs and anthems that were played in those clubs night after night? This is how, for the only time in 21-year career as a paranormal investigator, I found myself running an SB11 spirit box, an Ovulus, a device that uses energy levels in the surrounding atmosphere to speak from a pre-programmed vocabulary of words and multiple voice recorders, alongside the crooning of Gloria Gaynor's hit, I Will Survive. While my team and I were gathered around a haunted swimming pool, truly a surreal experience, if ever there was one. Yet, try as we might, we couldn't stimulate anything in the way of paranormal activity. After the initial excitement of the laser grid blacking out, the battery levels in our equipment continued to drain at a normal, consistent pace. Either the spirits weren't interested in interacting with us, they were scared, or the place wasn't actually haunted in the first place. Who's that? Cletus said suddenly, pointing toward the outside window and the ground-lit patio. We all turned to look, and I personally couldn't see anybody, and neither could Aaron, Jason, or Sean. Yet Arthur thought that he had caught sight of a figure moving around out there, and agreed with Sean that something seemed to be playing cat and mouse with us. They duly went outside and searched the grounds, but could find nobody. I have to confess that my first suspicion was that somebody could have been pranking us, perhaps Robert Graves or one of his family members. I had absolutely no reason to doubt their integrity, however, and the truth was that if they had been responsible for the sightings that we had experienced that night, they were playing a very risky game, because we deployed thermal imaging cameras during our search of the property and the woods outside. The chances of us catching a living, breathing perpetrator were very good indeed, and yet we found nobody at all out there. I apologize. I have a movie playing in the background, and it's a horror. While the others continued to search the grounds, Sean, Aaron, and I settled down by the swimming pool in order to conduct an EVP session. We sat on the cold tile with our backs to the wall, letting the voice recorders run and asking the usual questions. It's important to note that we were facing the outside windows, which meant that we could not see the door to the pool room because it was the same side of the room as we were. A few minutes into the session, we heard a noise coming from somewhere off to our right. What's that? I asked, craning my neck to look. Oh, somebody's trying to get in. I could see that the door handle was jiggling. Come on in, Aaron called out. It's not locked. There was no answer. Frowning, she got up and went to check, opening the door. The hallway outside was empty, and going further afield, she checked the staircase, the locker room, and the bar. All were deserted. It seemed that we had an invisible visitor. I, for one, hoped that it was just the first of many. When we played back the voice recorder, there was no EVPs to be found, which was disappointing. When our teammates came back empty-handed, we told them that what had happened. They wanted to give the pool a try for themselves. I had no objections, so we all took up positions at points around the room, making sure that we could see the door clearly this time, and settled down to see what happened. There's a presence here, Sean said. I asked him to describe what he was sensing. It's a male energy, most definitely, and it really does not like us being in here at all. This male is right there in the middle of the pool, and oh wow, it's a very strong energy, completely negative in nature and extremely threatening. That doesn't sound like one of the victims to me, Jason said. Indeed, it not. That description evoked the image of the former master of the house, Herb Baumeister. Sitting closest to the doorway, Cletus mumbled that he heard the sound of a sigh. A few seconds later, he heard it again. How do you like the fact that there's a woman in the room? He asked, looking directly at Aaron. Is that okay with you? Just heard a whisper over there, Sean called out. I'm sure, said the word yes. Excited at the prospect of finally making some headway, we continued asking questions for another 20 minutes, then reconvened in the bar to listen to the audio files. Frustratingly, none of the auditory phenomenon had turned up on the recording. We took a break, digging into the snack foods and discussing what we'd do next. The sound of footsteps on the staircase made us all stop talking. The Graves family had already gone to bed an hour before. Arthur went to look and found a hangdog-looking Winston, the family pooch, standing at the bottom of the stairs, wagging his tail slowly from side to side. How did you get out, Winston? Arthur wanted to know. Somehow the door at the top of the staircase had been opened, so I'm sorry. Rob had told us he was locking it out before he turned in for the night, yet now there it was, standing wide open. Arthur wrangled the pooch back upstairs. Why can't you just call it a dog? It took a quick look around the main floor of the house. Other than the sound of a TV drifting down from the upper floor, everything was quiet and dark. Try as we might, we couldn't figure out how Winston had gotten loose. Rob confirmed the next day that nobody had come downstairs to unlock the door leading down to the basement. Unfortunately, there was no way the one eyewitness to it all could even tell us what happened, as we were forced to chalk it up to more Fox Hollow weirdness. That would happen a lot over the next few days of investigation. We continued to work through the night, conducting further experiments and focusing the majority of our attention on the pooch and its immediate surroundings. The rain eased off, giving way to a cloudy, overcast night sky. It was extremely cold outside, meaning that we weren't comfortable spending more than a few minutes out there at a time. And so the woods didn't get much of our time and effort. Besides, there was still a howling wind, the last remnant of the storm, and the incessant creaking of tree branches was contaminating our audio recordings, even inside the house itself, rendering the potential EVP evidence basically useless. Caffeine kept us going, but as the night wore on, fatigue began to overtake everyone. We had all flown in from Colorado earlier the day before and had been on our feet for close to 24 hours. As we were packing up our gear and getting ready to head back to our hotel for some much-needed rest, we noticed something so strange. The changing room door had somehow managed to open itself. We had made a point of closing it and keeping it closed throughout the night, as we did with all the downstairs doors. Now, just like the door at the top of the stairs, this one seemed to have developed a mind of its own. All right, this one is titled Showdown. I was getting on for daybreak by the time we reached our hotel. Everybody felt totally wiped, and so we all agreed to sleep late. We slept until 2 o'clock that afternoon, went for a huge lunch, and were back at the farm by 4. The skies were still overcast and gloomy, but at least the rain had stopped. It was cold. We decided to use what daylight remained to explore the woods a little, wandering down to the far edges of the property. There we stumbled upon an underground tunnel. Dubbed on the walls were the words "Bones" and "Herb was here." Wow. Proof positive that the local kids were well aware of Fox Hollow Farm's history. All of our things were just as we'd left them when we finished up earlier that morning. The first order of business was to set a game plan for the coming investigation. We'd gone very tech-heavy the night before, and I therefore wanted to try the opposite end of the spectrum for a little bit, using some of the more time-honored methods of research. Rob isn't a big fan of the spirit board being used at Fox Hollow Farm. Rob is the owner. Mainly because a number of psychics have warned him of the perils of using such a device. I agree with these people. In my personal experience, using a spirit board is no different from using a spirit box, conducting an EVP session, or any other method of attempting to communicate with disincarnate entities. They all have the theoretical capability of opening doorways and inviting energies in. Yet the board continues to get a bad rap. And out of respect for our gracious hosts, we did not use one at the farm. Anybody have any thoughts or ideas on the spirit board? Actually, that's a good question. People use, they do EVP sessions. They use recordings. They're videotaping. They use the spirit box. A whole bunch of different things. So what's the difference between using a spirit box and using all those other things? And why is the spirit board, the Ouija board, why has that got such a bad rap and not all the other things? Because I kind of agree. All the other things people use is also, invoking, or not invoking, but trying to get the entity's attention and provoking is what I meant to say, not invoking, and provoking them, same as a Ouija board, right? So I don't know. Instead, I opted to use a technique known as the human pendulum. Essentially, the way it works is that one person volunteers to be the pendulum. They stand in the middle of a fairly open space, in this case at the shallow end of the pool, oh boy, and are watched closely by observers on both sides. In our case, we also video recorded the sessions for future analysis. Another investigator controls the session and acts as the questioner, encouraging any entities present that wish to communicate to do so by means of the human pendulum. I've never heard of this. An emphasis is placed on the fact that only spirits of an honest, light nature are permitted to communicate, and that dark entities are prohibited from doing so. This sometimes, but not always, acts as a safety measure for the participants. Once the pendulum is opened up, the questioner asks the spirit to demonstrate the yes position. The person acting as the pendulum is often surprised to find themselves tilting forward, backward, or to one side, completely against their will. I swear I'm not doing that. in an all too common response for the first time pendulum volunteers. Once the yes position has been established, the same needs to be done for the no position, and then you're off to the races, as they say in Kentucky. Roughly 14 to 50% of people I've tried this technique on have been susceptible to it. Leaving aside the possibility of intentional fraud, I completely trust the integrity of those on my team. That are two obvious explanations for what is going on with the human pendulum. Most skeptics come down on the side of it all being micromuscular motion, a series of completely involuntary nervous signals that are causing the volunteer to sway back and forth in response to questions. After all, many of us have a deep subconscious desire to please. This is one explanation for how spirit boards work. Micromuscular tremors in the hands and forearms moving the planchette around to spell out meaningful words. The skeptics do indeed have a point at this very real neurological reflex, and one that the experiencer has no control over. However, I believe that it is also possible for genuine spirit communication to occur via those same means. Just because the spirit board and the human pendulum sometimes fall victim to false positives does not mean that this is always the case. I've conducted a number of pendulum sessions in which the volunteer was wearing noise-canceling headphones and listening to loud music, effectively blocking out their ability to hear the questions being spoken. The questioner stood directly behind them to ensure that lip reading wasn't a factor either. We still got meaningful, verifiable responses in a number of those cases, leading me to conclude that the human pendulum can sometimes be a very effective tool in the paranormal investigator's arsenal. Yep, I wouldn't be doing that. We chose a swimming pool as our location of choice. I volunteered to go first. The technique has always worked for me, and I did it, and it did so in this case, but not in the way I was expecting. While the pendulum method itself didn't give us any answers, it generated some interesting effects on those of us who were taking part. While my session was going on, Sean felt a distinct touch of fingers caressing his hand, as though an invisible person wanted to hold it. It's more of a solid, friendly touch, he explained afterward. Not in the least bit creepy. During the session, Erin felt herself get pushed firmly in the back, almost knocking her off balance and making her fall. It appeared that somebody was continuing their dislike for having a female present in what had once been an almost entirely male domain. Neither Jason, Sean, nor Cletus had any positive results with the pendulum technique, and Arthur wasn't particularly inclined to try, so there we were at that 40% success rate. We were interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected guest, albeit one that I was only too happy to meet. Of all the recent tenants of Box Hollow Farm, Joe LeBlanc had arguably suffered the most at the hands of whatever haunted it. He had been physically attacked by an invisible force while swimming in the pool, to the point where he had almost drowned, and had been subjected to constant barrage of the paranormal phenomenon and brain-bending nightmares while living in the apartment at the side of the main house. The accounts in this book detailing exactly what he experienced during this time living at Box Hollow Farm were drawn from a very candid interview that he granted me during this visit. You're a braver man than I am, Joe, I said at the conclusion of his story. If that had happened to me, there's no way you'd ever get me back in that pool for love or money. Herb's basically a coward, Joe said. His tone was of disdain. I wouldn't let him scare me out of what I wanted to do. I could totally respect his point of view, wanting to pick his brain as much as possible, but he was at our disposal. I asked Joe to tell me what he knew and what his opinions were on the subject of the haunting. Joe believes that Fox Hollow is haunted by 7 discrete and separate entities. He began to check them off his fingers as he named them all. You got Herb Baumeister himself, or something that likes to masquerade as him. Then there's 5 of his victims, and finally, the Elemental. I'd heard about the Elemental from Rob, who seemed to take the idea with a grain of salt. Elementals are reputed to be non-human spirits that arise from the land, from woods, streams, and rocks. Many cultures believe in them, some actively so, whereas in others they have faded into myth and folklore, but the concept is prevalent along societies all around the world. I have never heard of an Elemental. Exactly. It lives in the woods out back, Joe explained. It's definitely not human. At least one investigator who came here thinks that it's demonic, but I'm not entirely sure about that. But it is real. I know because I've seen it. Despite his terrifying encounter with the male apparition in the woods one night, Joe had always liked to run along the deer trails after nightfall. It wasn't too long before he noticed that there was a dark figure. He described it as being blacker than black, flitting back and forth amongst the trees, close to where he and Vicky had sighted the red-shirted, legless young man. If you get out there after dark when everything's still and quiet and just stand there watching and waiting, often you'll see it. It's tall and thin. It moves in this weird way, too fast to be a human, going from tree to tree. Has it ever harmed anybody? Joe shook his head, not that I'm aware of. Elemental keeps to itself for the most part. I didn't find the concept of elemental beings to be totally unbelievable, but I've never encountered one before in my career as a paranormal investigator. If there really were such things, then I would very much like to encounter one. Unfortunately, the conditions outside were cold and miserable, especially after dark, but I made a mental note to try to get out there to look into the elemental claims at some point if the opportunity arose. After saying that he could stay and hang out with us for a few hours that night, Joe asked what he could do to help our investigation. I explained that based on what I heard, Joe seemed to be a huge catalyst for the haunting, which had really kicked into high gear once he had first moved in. Would he be willing to help us try to draw out Herb Baumeister? F that, I'd be running. Hell no. As things turned out, he was more than happy to do that. You tend to get the best results in the pump room, he told us. Bring your equipment and let's head out in there. Maybe we can get him to talk. There was no way we were going to pass up that opportunity. Scooping up some of our equipment, we followed him into the pump room and started setting it out, putting REM pods, K2 meters, and tree field EMF meters on every available flat surface. Each device serves a similar yet slightly different purpose. The REM pod senses energy changes in the area directly surrounding the antenna, giving a visual and audible alarm to alert investigators that something unusual may be happening. Those things are annoying. Those REM pods, like, it's annoying. Annoying as hell. I would never use one. They're annoying. The K2 meter is a basic detector of electromagnetic energy, and the tree field is a more sophisticated variant that is often used to measure EMF levels in the industrial setting. The pump room was cramped with all of us standing in there, crammed in shoulder to shoulder, but nobody wanted to miss what could be a showdown between Joe and his former tormentor. I should warn you, I like to really provoke that guy, Joe said, finding a clear place to stand and pulling the door shut behind him. The pump room was pitch black, save for the steadily glowing lights of our equipment. We had already baselined the room for EMF and found it to be basically normal. In other words, the background levels were about the same as you would find anywhere else in the house that didn't have any major electrical appliances. We noted the few hot spots that were present so that we could discount them as being potential evidence. Provocation is usually a bad idea when it comes to paranormal research. Almost every investigator has a story or knows somebody with a story that involves provoking an entity and suddenly getting much more than they bargained for, often in the form of physical injuries such as scratches and bruising. Yeah, it's stupid as hell. Don't do it. Audience, don't do it. Don't provoke anything. Don't. You don't want to invite something in and then never be able to get it out or away from you. Trust me, don't. I grew up in a haunted house. I can tell you stories for days, but I've had something evil attached to me for many, many, many years. I believe it's evil, and it's male, and it hates me, and it loves to torment me. However, I don't know if it's around me anymore because I don't feel the hate, and I'm not as scared as I used to be, and it's mainly, I think he's gone. My friend was a psychic, and I told him about it. He did something, said something, and I haven't felt that energy since. So I do believe it's gone now, but I didn't invoke it or anything, or provoke it, or whatever, instigate anything. It just, I think because I was open to the possibility of spirits, guardian angels, life after death and all that good stuff when I believe it was grade 5. I was open to it because some idiot told me something and scared the shit out of me, and ever since then I've been hearing things, seeing things, feeling things, knowing things. Yeah. So anyways. Okay. I try not to use the technique very often, but I'm not above provoking a little if the circumstances seem to call for it. I wanted to show the spirits of Herb's victims, if indeed they were present. Nothing but compassion, yet for Herb Baumeister himself, I had nothing but loathing. True to his word, Joe was pulling no punches when it came to baiting the spirit of Herb Baumeister. Come on, Herb, stop being a chicken shit, Joe barked into the darkness. You should be ashamed of what you did to those poor guys. What kind of a coward are you? Why don't you try pushing us around now, huh? Oh my God. Our EMF meters were going berserk. registering frequent and intense spikes of energy right there among us in the pump room. Yeah, no shit. The source couldn't have been us. Our cell phones were all switched off for starters, and we'd already accounted for the baseline levels of the electromagnetic energy. The fact that most of the spikes seemed to coincide with one of Joe's provocation questions, our statements could hardly have been a coincidence. Jesus, I practically jumped out of my skin when I felt a cold hand brush against my triceps. My first instinct was to turn and yell at the investigator standing behind me, but when I looked, I could see that both of his hands were operating a camera. Then I began to wonder if it was a spider or an insect, but a quick sweep with a flashlight ruled that out. The touch had been more of a caress, the kind of affectionate, flirtatious thing one would do to a lover. It had sent shivers running all through my body and set my heart racing, and not in a good way. There were sinister overtones to what I just felt, and my mind was conjuring up images of invisible entities running its fingertips across my skin. It was the most unnerving part of the entire investigation so far. A few minutes later, it was Erin's turn to be the beneficiary of a little personal attention. "Hey," she said, sounding more annoyed than frightened. "Knock it off." She had just been poked in the back by 2 fingers, just beneath the level of her bra. And described it as being a distinct, forceful jab. Well, they did call Herb Baumeister Herbert the pervert. Could one of the entities present have been expressing their distaste for the presence of a female? That was certainly the way we interpreted it. When the session was over, we all felt drained, both physically and emotionally. It had been an intense experience, and I'd forgotten the impression that it was rather cathartic for Joe, giving him the opportunity to confront the one-time tormentor. He had definitely been in take-no-crap mode, demanding Herb to show himself, and in return getting results in the form of electromagnetic spikes and then physical manifestations. The team took a break, digging into our snack stash. Feeling that his work was done, Joe said his goodbyes and headed out for the night. A few minutes later, Sean was standing outside the door to the restroom, waiting for his turn to use it, when he suddenly felt 2 fingers poke him sharply in the small of his back. What the? He heard the sound of a male voice mumbling, something from somewhere over his shoulder, in the center of the locker room. Arthur, who was in the restroom at the time, reported that he had heard the sound of 2 male voices speaking at the time of the incident. One was recognizably Sean's, and the other was much harder to make out. "You said something, Sean, and some guy answered you," Arthur insisted when the 2 compared notes afterward. When I heard about it, I immediately tried to put things in context. Joe had gone full-bore provocateur on Herb Baumeister in the pump room. In the immediate aftermath of that, 2 of my fellow investigators had gotten aggressively jabbed in the back, and I'd received a full-on creeper treatment. It was getting harder and harder to discount the idea that someone or something was playing games with us that night. When we kicked off our next run of investigation, Sean was less than thrilled to discover that his video camera, which had been fully charged just a few minutes before, was now completely dead. Yet another unexplained power drain, just the latest of many that had plagued us over the past few nights. Reasoning that it was a good idea to strike while the iron was hot, I wanted to try another EVP session in the pump room. Unfortunately, this one was a bust, which supported the theory that Joe LeBlanc had acted as a kind of lightning rod for the paranormal activity at Fox Hollow Farm. The rest of the night was quiet, with one exception. While Arthur was standing outside on the patio, Sean was sitting on the couch at the bar, reading the Lord's Prayer out loud. 3 loud, violent thuds suddenly echoed around the room, coming from up above his head. "I heard it too," Arthur said, stepping back inside the sliding glass doors. He pointed up toward the ceiling. 3 real loud bangs. "Came from up there, right?" "It's always 3. Always." Both men had heard the exact same thing. One from inside the house and one outside. I asked Rob and Vicky the next morning if they had perhaps dropped something heavy on the floor. 3 consecutive times. Both had been fast asleep at the time of the thudding. Something apparently wasn't overly fond of the Lord's Prayer. Yeah, they're not usually. This one's called Into the Pool. For our 3rd and final night, it was finally time for me to do something I've been putting off ever since we arrived at Fox Hollow Farm. Oh boy, it was time to get in the pool. I brought along a pair of beach shorts for just this purpose. As I got changed in the locker room, it was hard to shake a sense of unease due to some of the stories I've been told about that particular part of the building. When I walked into the pool room, my fellow investigators had taken up positions all around the poolside. They had set up a bunch of gear, rigging the pool with cameras, audio recorders, and monitoring equipment of all kinds. Rob had wound back the heavy cover all the way. I stood at the edge, dipped my toes 1 foot in the water. The water was ice cold. Ice cold. Sorry, but the water Bob had told me on our arrival at the farm. It cost $1,000 a month to heat that thing. We switched the heating off a few weeks ago. I had no choice but to suck it up. Hey, just jump in, Aaron smirked. Not helping, Aaron. Moving the steps that went down into the pool, I gripped the handrail slightly and took my first step. My foot instantly went to sleep. Gritting my teeth, I stepped down again. Now the water was up to my knees, and this really was not seeming like a good idea. But I knew that if I wussed out now, it would be captured on video for all eternity, and my team would never let me hear the last of it. I took the last steps quickly. The water was now up to my chest, and I was already starting to shiver. Figuring that it would be less painful to pull the Band-Aid off fast, I launched off the side of the pool and kicked across into deeper water. Now my teeth were chattering. I could barely feel anything from the neck down. I went into breaststroke, heading for the deep end, all too aware that this was where Joe LeBlanc had been attacked, choked by an invisible assailant who had tried to drag him underneath the surface. Fortunately, I reached the far side unmolested and turned back to the opposite direction. One of my colleagues turned out the lights, plunging the pool into darkness. Treading water in the middle of the pool, I took a few minutes to look all around me. My sides kept being drawn toward the pump room door, dark and menacing. I couldn't stop thinking about all those poor young men who had met their death in the same pool at the hands of a monster. It was a poignant moment for me. I felt an indefinable kingship with them. Purely because I was swimming in the same place that they once had. The big difference was that I would be walking out of this pool alive with the rest of my life in front of me. They had been robbed of that basic right, and that made me angry. There is Richard Eastep. He's one of the authors of this book, but there he is in the pool. He's nuts. Herbert Baumeister, you're 1/6 son of a bitch, I said. What you did here was monstrous. Unforgivable. Are you even the slightest bit sorry for what you did to those guys? Of course, there was no answer. I made a few laps around the pool, holding a digital voice recorder above my head as I asked more questions. I was less than polite to the spirit of Herb Baumeister, but was extremely respectful when addressing any victim that may be present, asking repeatedly whether there was any help we could offer them while we were here. My most fervent wish was that none of those souls were still a resident at Fox Hollow Farm. They had already suffered far too much, and I hoped that they had now found peace. Finally, I needed to get out of the pool before my muscles began to cramp up. Setting the voice recorder on the side of the pool, I climbed out and went off to dry myself and get changed back into my clothes. Then we reconvened to the bar to go over the audio. We hit the jackpot on one of the video files that had been taken from the side of the pool. I've been resting my arms against the ledge, speaking into the camera about how cold the water was. That's the photo right here. Over the sound of my voice and chattering teeth, a male voice could be heard, clearly and distinctly, whispering a single word. Laura. Who is Laura? I sat bolt upright in my chair when I heard it, and I replayed this section a couple times. There it was, plain as day. Did any of you guys say a word? I asked my fellow investigators. All shook their heads. It obviously couldn't have been Aaron, and it didn't sound like Cletus, Sean, or Jason, or Arthur. More than any other EVP I have ever gotten in my career, this one shook me up for the very specific reason that Laura is the name of my wife. Oh shit. While I was swimming around the pool, Laura was hundreds of miles away at her home in Colorado. The voice that had whispered her name sounded silky and menacing. It may have been my imagination working overtime, but I could have sworn that there was an implied threat in its tone. I would take it as a threat. Perhaps because Joe wasn't present, our equipment didn't pick up much on that last night at Fox Hollow. There were a few more EVPs, none of them really clear enough to knock our socks off. After packing up our gear, we left before sun came up. After closing and locking the gate at the end of the driveway, we got out of our cars and paused to take a team photograph around the Fox Hollow Farm sign. It had been quite the experience, and the one I wouldn't have traded for the world. There were still hours of evidence to review to get done when we returned home, and I already knew that I would need to come back again to gather more evidence and ask more questions. Despite, or perhaps because, of its tragic history, it held a very strange attraction. Fox Hollow Farm wasn't done with us yet. All right. I'll see you guys in the comments, and I will continue reading until the book's done. Bye, guys.